Hey folks, Seth Liebson here. As we watch cities burn, statues being torn down, and calls to defund the police, if you haven't already, it may be time to think about personal protection. Guns Etc. has 10,200 square feet of guns, ammo, safes, and a staff that will work with you to find the best firearm for your situation. So stop by their huge store in Mesa or click on gunsetc.com and have access to over $400 million in firearms and accessories. And if you like my monologues, please subscribe to 960 The Patriots YouTube channel. Welcome back and happy Friday, August 7th, 2020. It's an odd thing how discredited philosophies, or once discredited philosophies, just never seem to go away. We've never really fully buried fascism or National Socialism, obviously. And like a ghoul in the night, but maybe knowing no distinction between day and night, Karl Marx has never fully been buried either. We thought we buried him in 1989. We didn't. I'm reminded here of what P.J. O'Rourke wrote in 1989, at the time of the Berlin Wall's breach. He was teary-eyed, but knew we in the West didn't quite celebrate it quite rightly, and thus didn't bury the ideology of the wall, or Marxism, quite rightly. O'Rourke wrote at the time, "I think there are a lot of people that don't get it. Our own President Bush seems to regard the events in Eastern Europe as some kind of odd dance craze or something. When I got back to the United States, I was looking through the magazines and newspapers, and it seemed that all I saw were editorial writers pulling long faces about whither a united Germany and whence America's adjustments to the new realities in Europe. Is that the kind of noise people were making in Times Square on VE Day? I say, shut up, you egghead flapgums. We've got the whole rest of history to sweat the small stuff, and those discredited peace creeps, they can zip their soup coolers too. They think Mikhail Gorbachev is a visionary? Yeah, he's a visionary, like Hirohito was after Nagasaki. We won, and let's not let anybody forget it. We the people, the free and equal citizens of democracies, we living exemplars of the rights of man, tore a new you-know-what into international communism. Their wall is breached. Their gut string is busted. The rot of their dead body politic fills the nostrils of the earth with a glorious stink. We cleaned the clock of Marxism. We mopped the floor with them. We ran the Reds through the ringer and hung them out to dry. The privilege of liberty and the sanctity of the individual went out and whipped butt. And the best thing about our victory is the way we did it, not just with ICBMs and Green Berets and aid to the Contras. Those things were important, but in the end we beat them with Levi 501 jeans. 72 years of communist indoctrination and propaganda was drowned out by a 3-ounce Sony Walkman. Huge totalitarian system with all its tanks and guns, gulag camps and secret police. It's been brought to its knees because nobody wants to wear Bulgarian shoes. They may have had the soldiers and the warheads and the fine-sounding ideology that suckered the college students and nitwit third-worlders, but we had all the fun. Now they're lunch, and we're number one on the planet. Made me want to do a little sack dance right there in the Cold War's end zone. We're the best. We're the greatest. The only undefeated socio-economic system in the league. I wanted to get up on the wall and really rub it in. Taste the ash heap of history, you bullshit nose wipes. But there was nobody to jeer at. Everyone over there was in West Berlin, watching Paula Abdul videos. Not that there's anything terribly wrong with Paula Abdul videos, but she's back. I just saw her in a new ad on television for an anti-pain product. And guess what? Marxism is back too. It never left China. We just decided to appease it there, and nobody more so than something in America called the NBA or great American companies like Nike. I wonder just now how many Soviet and German refuseniks were asking Americans to smuggle in Nike products. If they only knew then what they know now. Shame on Nike, and shame on us for not understanding what victory was. Wringing our hands about the withering of a united Germany and whence America's adjustments to the new realities in Europe, indeed. We do this all the time, and too much. Over-intellectualizing ourselves into a frothy worry of pseudo-sophisticated junk thought. Why else do you think so many got away for so long as being the intelligentsia and responsible people, keeping the U.S. Embassy out of Jerusalem, lest it start a war in the Middle East? One example. In that example, it didn't. It never would have. The Middle East was already in war, and it knew only war, and it had nothing to do with Jerusalem, or Jews, or Christians. Anyway, Marxism never left China, and of course, those writing headlines about whence America's adjustments and the withering away of a united Germany were informed by so many, wait for it, where did these journalism school graduates get their intel on world affairs and political philosophy? I can guarantee you, not at the Columbia School or the Missouri schools of journalism, but at the Columbia and Missouri and so many other schools of political science. Well, they didn't take classes there in those schools, most likely, our journalists, but they called the professors there for comment, and somebody forgot to instruct our journalists that those professors were opining on our defeated system of governing philosophy those professors, still believed in. That's where Marxism was. China, Cuba, and in our own faculties in America. That's why we never quite had the right celebrations of victory, which is why we never quite had the right celebrations of our enemy's defeat, which is why we never quite defeated the enemy. Leo Strauss once worried about nations being defeated on the battlefield and annihilated as political beings, depriving their conquerors of the most sublime fruits of victory, the imposition on him of the yoke of its own thought. What is worse, of course, is when the defeated enemy imposes their intellectual thought on the victors, which, I fear, is truly our present concern and worry. Leo Strauss's student, Harry Jaffa, said this about Marx. Marx saw morality as the great enemy of human well-being, and now the society of the future is one in which moral distinctions based upon the Judeo-Christian and Greek traditions will all dissolve. Without even knowing it, we are moving into a communist world. Without revolution, we are moving into the world that Marx wanted. I would differ to say just this. Some of us do today know this, some of us not enough. And the markings of the revolution, for those of us willing to see things as they really are all around us. First, take over education and create an intellectual class. Then move it to the streets. So when you have Antifa and BLM protests and riots making Marxist demands like dissolution of the family and dissolution of police and dissolution of private or alternative education, and you wed that to a cowardice in denouncing them, you wed that to an attempt to appease and kneel and march with them, you wed that to a lack of confidence in that which they protest against, you have, as I say, the markings and trappings of what every revolution in history looked like up until today. Why would this or should this be any different? Let us recall and never tire of pointing out that the very founders of BLM bragged of being trained Marxists. They are not unproud of this. They are not shy. And the main founder, Patrice Cullors, is a professor here in Arizona at Prescott College. She doesn't have a PhD, but that's okay. We're used to Marxists getting faculty appointments prior to their terminal degrees, like Angela Davis in the UC system. The thing is not the credential everyone else has to abide. The thing is to think right. Anyway, what's important to note is the contours of how this revolution is hardened and how it's at our campuses. We can scold the NBA and Nike, and if perhaps enough consumers of professional sports and sports clothing stood up and said something or boycotted the NBA and Nike, that would be sufficient. But that is at the retail level of this revolution, figuratively and literally. I worry about the wholesale, our campuses. There are no more Ronald Reagans who, as governor, stood up to them and against them. Jonathan Turley is a Democrat, a law professor, but he's not a Democrat like Nancy Pelosi is a Democrat. He's a Democrat like John Kennedy and LBJ and Hubert Humphrey and Daniel Moynihan and Joe Lieberman were Democrats. A rare breed and bird, but not an unintelligent one. He testified before the Senate this week, and here is some of what he said. He said, "In my 3 decades of teaching, I have never seen the level of fear and intimidation that we have today on our campuses. Many professors are afraid to voice dissenting views of the current protests or other issues out of fear that they could be accused of racism or even physically attacked. Some professors have indeed been assaulted or required police protection after voicing opposing views. To put it simply, Antifa and these other extremist groups are winning, and few people seem to be taking notice. They are winning because universities are now effectively blocking conservative or opposing speakers to avoid violent clashes. They are winning because the media and politicians downplay such violence to avoid criticism. They are winning because local officials are ordering police to stand down or prosecutors to drop charges to avoid further conflict. They are winning because free speech itself is being viewed as a destabilizing factor in our schools and society. Antifa has achieved its anti-free speech agenda to a degree that even longtime critics never imagined possible. It only took inaction from our government and silence from our citizens. Note how he shows the success is hardened, fear and intimidation, and of course, censorship. Marxist tactics for Marxist ends. We used to tell ourselves what happened in the universities didn't matter much. It was a quaint 4 years that students would egress from and enter the real world and become normal. The problem is this, however. We forgot, or too many of us forgot, something along the way. Ideology is more powerful than the real world. There is nothing so powerful as a potent idea, irrespective of facts. If that were not true, you would not have the appeasing of China by capitalists. That were not true, you would not have police and National Guard kneeling with BLM and Antifa protesters. If it were not true, you would not have city councils trying to defund the police. But that's a small point. The larger point is the result. For if this were not true, you would not have Americans and elected officials kowtowing to noxious ideologies that have immiserated people, protesting the structures and history, foundations of the country America that has given more relief to more immiserated people than any other in the history of the world. So, item. It's not just our universities. Note the protests of the teachers' unions, and as we pointed out early in the week, they are working with the Democratic Socialists of America. Note, they are dressing in the same garb and using the same imagery of the Marxists and socialists in Europe in the 1980s who were protesting the weaponry Ronald Reagan deployed to defend the free against the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. Note the discount and destruction, not just the speech norms of the First Amendment, but the religious guarantees as well. For as Marx taught, religion is, after all, a poison to the masses. And of course, note the attack on the entirety of the Second Amendment in order to disarm the free, another badge of every Marxist regime. In other words, please do note how revolutions start. I worry who's tasting the ash heap of history now. I'm Seth Leibson. The lines are open.